Standing on the weathered stones of an ancient observatory, you feel the same wind that once stirred the robes of priests and astronomers. Across millennia, human eyes have watched storms gather and stars wheel overhead. But the stories they told about nature's power were far more than simple explanations. These were sacred conversations encoded in temple carvings and whispered in rituals. The Maya didn't just track the sun's path, they saw a god riding a celestial canoe. The builders of Stonehenge didn't merely mark solstices, they aligned stones to capture the breath of the earth itself. Tonight, we'll follow the footprints of civilizations who spoke the language of earthquakes and eclipses, discovering how they turned fear into reverence, chaos into cosmic order. Their world wasn't dominated by nature, it was alive with it, every lightning strike a message and every drought a test of faith. What secrets might their stones still hold about living in harmony with forces greater than ourselves? Across the high jungle canopies of the Maya world, priests tracked Venus not as a mere planet, but as a divine herald. When this brilliant star appeared as the morning light, warriors sharpened their blades, farmers prepared their fields, and kings planned their battles. The Maya called it Chak-Ek, the great star, weaving its 8-year cycle into sacred calendars that dictated everything from coronations to harvests. Meanwhile, a continent away, Babylonian astronomers etched cuneiform tablets with celestial omens, where Mars' glowing red meant looming conflict, and Jupiter's position could herald a king's rise or fall. Even the towering stones of Stonehenge whisper of this cosmic dialogue, their precise alignment with the summer solstice sunrise turning sunlight into a sacred script, read by generations of dawn-watching druids. What's astonishing isn't just their precision, but their certainty that the universe was speaking directly to them. A comet wasn't just a streak of light, it was a god's warning. An eclipse, the gods momentarily closing their eyes, and if we listen closely to these ancient stargazers, we might hear a profound truth. Their science and spirituality weren't separate, but two strands of the same rope pulling humanity toward understanding. Yet the forces they revered weren't just above them. They surged through rivers, crackled in fire, and trembled beneath the earth. The great rivers of the ancient world didn't just flow with water, they pulsed with divine energy. In Egypt, farmers watched the Nile's annual floods with both hope and dread, knowing that too little water meant famine, while too much could erase homes and fields in an instant. Yet they didn't see this as random chance. The god Hapi, depicted with blue skin and a belly swollen with offerings, was believed to command the floodwaters, his blessings sustaining the black land's fertility. To ignore his rituals was to risk the river's mercy, so temple walls bore hymns praising his generosity, and priests measured the rising waters with sacred nilometers, turning science into ceremony. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates could be just as unpredictable, surging without warning to drown crops or receding to leave behind cracked earth. Here, the god Enki ruled the sweet waters, his temper as changeable as the currents themselves. People built ziggurats not just as temples, but as towering anchors against his floods, their stepped sides symbolizing humanity's plea for balance. And in the Indus Valley, engineers designed intricate drainage systems not merely for function, but as offerings to the forces that gave life. Their perfectly aligned channels, a kind of prayer in brick and stone. Even the Minoans, surrounded by the untamed Mediterranean, wove the sea's danger into their worship. Their palaces held labyrinthine corridors mirroring the waves' shifting paths, and their frescoes showed priestesses dancing with dolphins, acknowledging both the ocean's bounty and its brutality. Every drop carried meaning, every flood a conversation between mortals and the divine. And if water was a sacred dialogue, then fire was the moment the gods spoke back. Flames have always been more than just tools, they were living messengers between worlds. For the Aztecs, fire crackled with the presence of Tecutli, their turquoise-clad god who gifted humanity the first sparks. Every hearth became a miniature altar, and every ritual sacrifice sent spirals of smoke skyward, carrying prayers straight to the divine. But fire wasn't merely a servant, it was a judge. During the new fire ceremony, priests would extinguish every flame across the empire, plunging cities into darkness. Then, atop a sacred pyramid, they'd kindle a new blaze in a victim's freshly opened chest, trusting that if the fire caught, the gods had granted another 52 years of survival. Half a world away in Persia, Zoroastrians gathered in fire temples where eternal flames burned as living symbols of Ahura Mazda's wisdom. These weren't just fires to warm hands by, they were mirrors reflecting cosmic truth, their purity so sacred that worshippers covered their mouths to avoid contaminating the holy glow. Even today, the Yazd Atash Bayram temple guards a flame said to have burned since the 4th century, its endurance proof of humanity's stubborn faith in fire's divinity. Then there were the volcanoes, those mountains that breathed fire like dragons. When Vesuvius buried Pompeii, the Romans didn't just see geology at work, they saw Vulcan hammering at his forge in fury. Hawaiian legends tell of Pele, the tempestuous goddess who sculpted islands with her molten tears and still dances in the lava flows of Kilauea. To stand near an erupting volcano wasn't just witnessing nature's power, it was standing at the threshold of creation itself, where destruction and renewal were two sides of the same blazing coin. This delicate balance between reverence and terror still lingers in our modern world. We light candles in quiet remembrance, build bonfires to mark turning points in the year, yet flee screaming when wildfires rage. Perhaps these ancient cultures understood something we've forgotten, that fire was never truly ours to control. It was and remains a force that demands respect, a reminder that some forces refuse to be tamed. And as the earth itself trembles beneath our feet, we'll see how civilizations turned even the ground we walk on into something sacred. The soil beneath their feet wasn't just dirt, it was breath, life, and sometimes rage. In the high Andes, Inca priests pressed their foreheads to the ground before planting, whispering prayers to Pachamama. To them, the earth was a mother who demanded gratitude. Pour a sip of chicha on the soil before drinking, bury offerings of coca leaves, and she might reward you with abundant harvest. Neglect her, and the terraces would lie barren, the potatoes shriveled. This wasn't superstition. It was a contract with the land itself, written in seeds and sweat. Meanwhile, across the Aegean, the Greeks knew the earth could be less forgiving. When the ground shook, they didn't speak of tectonic plates, they spoke of Gaia, the primordial goddess, shifting beneath the weight of human arrogance. After earthquakes shattered cities, survivors rebuilt atop sacred fault lines, not out of ignorance, but because they understood the land held power no wall could contain. Even their dead rested in ways that honored the earth, grave goods placed like gifts, bodies curled into the soil's embrace as if returning to a womb. From China's terracotta army standing guard in underground palaces to the Celtic barrows that still dot Europe's hills, these weren't just tombs. They were conversations with the earth, ancient architects aligning mounds with solstice sunrises, warriors buried with their faces turned toward sacred mountains. Every furrow plowed, every stone laid, carried the weight of ritual. Modern farmers might check soil pH with meters, but the Inca measured fertility by the song of the taki bird, the Greeks by the whisper of oak leaves at Dodona. Perhaps their greatest lesson wasn't just worshipping the earth, but listening to it, because after the tremors and the planting, the harvests and the landslides, one truth remained. Humanity's survival depended on honoring forces far older than kings or empires. And just as the earth spoke through quakes and harvests, the winds carried messages of their own, howling through temple corridors, snapping sails on voyages, shaping civilizations with every gust. A sudden gust through an open temple door wasn't just wind, It was the breath of the gods carrying whispers or warnings. In Mesopotamia, when dust storms swallowed cities, people didn't see bad weather. They saw Enlil, the storm god, roaring in displeasure. His tempests could flatten crops or nourish them, so priests scanned the skies for omens, interpreting cloud patterns like sacred texts. Even Hammurabi's laws invoked Enlil's name, proving that justice and hurricanes were equally divine forces here. Meanwhile, on the open Pacific, Polynesian navigators leaned into the trade winds like confidants, guided by Tangaroa, the ocean deity who carved paths through the waves. To sail against the wind wasn't just unwise, it was disrespect. They memorized wind songs passed down for generations, where a shift in breeze direction might signal an approaching island long before land appeared on the horizon. For them, navigation wasn't just science, it was a pact with the elements where every gust had intention. Far to the north, Norse sailors watched storm clouds gather with a mix of dread and reverence. To them, thunder wasn't static electricity. It was Thor driving his chariot across the sky, hammer swinging. They carved his symbol onto ship prows, not just for protection, but as a humble request. Let us ride the storm, not become its prey. Even hurricanes had personalities. Some cultures saw them as battling gods, like the Aztec Tlaloc and Ecological wrestling in the skies, their clashes spinning into cyclones. And when destruction came, it was never meaningless. After a tornado ripped through a village, survivors didn't just rebuild. They searched for the lesson in the wreckage. Had they offended the wind spirits, neglected an offering, the storm's aftermath became a sacred audit, a chance to realign with forces no wall could withstand. Yet for all their fury, winds also carried mercy. The same gales that sank ships also spread seeds, filled sails, and brought monsoon rains to parched fields. This duality, destroyer and life-giver, resonates even today. We still name hurricanes, a faint echo of the old belief that storms have wills of their own. And when we tense at a howling gale outside our windows, maybe we're not so different from those ancient sky watchers still listening deep down for the voice in the wind. And just as tempests revealed divine temperament, the creatures sharing these landscapes became more than animals. They were living omens, feathers and fur woven into the fabric of the sacred. A golden scarab beetle emerges from the Nile's mud, rolling a ball of dung with meticulous care. To an Egyptian priest, this wasn't just an insect at work. It was Khepri, the god of dawn, pushing the sun itself across the heavens in a miniature cosmos. Across civilizations, animals weren't merely observed, they were read, their every movement a syllable in a divine language. The Maya tracked the jaguar's stealthy tread through the jungle and saw the night sun moving through the underworld, its spotted coat mirroring the starry sky. In the snowy halls of Valhalla, Odin's wolves Jerry and Freki weren't just pets but extensions of the god's own hunger for wisdom and war, devouring sacrifices, yes, but also guarding the thresholds between worlds. Even the most mundane creatures carried cosmic weight. A Hindu farmer might pause his plow to let a cow pass, not out of mere kindness, but because her body housed the souls of ancestors and deities. In China, the sudden arrival of cranes in a village square signaled impending fortune, while the Aztecs viewed hummingbirds as fallen warriors returning to sip the nectar of eternity. But these connections went deeper than symbolism. When flocks of birds altered their migration paths or wolves howled in daylight, entire cities took notice. Babylonian diviners tracked canine behavior to predict uprisings. Celtic druids studied salmon leaps in sacred pools for glimpses of the future. The natural world was a living oracle, its creatures the unwitting mouthpieces of gods. What's striking isn't just the reverence for animals, it's the intimacy. These cultures didn't place themselves above nature's hierarchy, but within it. A Norse skald might compose poetry about ravens as his sky kindred, while an Egyptian embalmer carefully preserved a cat's body alongside human mummies, ensuring both could navigate the afterlife together. This worldview held no concept of wildlife, only kin, messengers, and sometimes judges. And when disasters struck, floods swallowing temples, earthquakes toppling palaces, these societies didn't see random chaos. They saw the claws and teeth of the natural world delivering verdicts, as if the sacred animals themselves had turned jury. The line between omen and punishment blurred, leaving one chilling question: had humanity failed to heed the warnings written in wings and paw prints? When the ground split open or the seas rose without warning, our ancestors didn't see catastrophe, they saw consequence. The same floodwaters that appear in Genesis as divine judgment also surge through the epic of Gilgamesh, where the gods grow weary of humanity's noise and decide to wipe the slate clean. But this wasn't unique to the Near East. On Crete, the ruins of the Minoan palaces bear scars from tsunamis so violent, later Greeks would spin tales of Poseidon striking his trident in fury, punishment for a king's arrogance or a city's forgotten offerings. Half a world away, the Aztecs interpreted earthquakes as the restless stirrings of Tlaltecutli, the monstrous earth goddess whose hunger could only be satisfied with blood sacrifices. Even Japan's kami spirits, usually benevolent, would shake the earth or spew fire from Mount Fuji when disrespected. What ties these stories together isn't just fear, it's accountability. A disaster wasn't a random act but a verdict handed down by forces humanity had failed to honor. Yet there's another layer to these myths. In the Andes, when landslides buried villages, survivors spoke not of punishment but pachacuti, a Quechua word meaning world reversal. These weren't acts of vengeance but cosmic resets, moments when the universe rebalanced itself. The same idea hums through Hindu texts where Shiva's dance of destruction clears space for renewal. Perhaps these narratives served a deeper purpose. They transformed helplessness into agency. If disasters resulted from human actions, then better actions might prevent them. Polynesian navigators avoided overfishing sacred reefs, knowing the ocean's retaliation would be swift. Maya kings fasted and bled before planting seasons, ensuring the rains would come. In a world without satellites or seismographs, these beliefs weren't ignorance, they were survival strategies, coded in myth and ritual. Today, we map fault lines and track hurricanes, yet ancient questions linger. When wildfires rage or glaciers vanish, do we still hear echoes of those old warnings? The answer might lie not in their superstitions, but in their insight, that nature's fury often follows broken covenants. Now, let's step beyond disaster into the places where these beliefs took root, the mountains, groves, and rivers that weren't just backdrops to sacred stories, but active characters in them. The peaks of the Andes didn't just scrape the sky, they held it up. To the Inca, these jagged summits were apus, living mountain spirits who dictated weather, guarded valleys, and demanded tribute. A traveler crossing a high pass would place a stone on a cairn, not just to mark the path, but to whisper a prayer to the peaks. Meanwhile, half a world away in Australia, the vast rust-red bulk of Uluru wasn't just a rock, it was a living storybook. Every crevice and ripple in its surface told of ancestral beings who shaped the land in the dreamtime, their energy still pulsing through the stone. To touch it wasn't tourism, it was communion. Caves held even deeper mysteries. Entering Lascaux's painted caverns 20,000 years ago wasn't a casual stroll. It was a descent into the underworld, where flickering torchlight brought bison and horses to life on the walls. These weren't mere decorations, they were portals. The Maya believed caves like Belize Acton Tunashil Muknal were the mouths of Xibalba, the realm of the dead, where shamans ventured to bargain with spirits. Even Mount Sinai's craggy slopes, where Moses received the commandments, followed this pattern. High places weren't just closer to divinity, they were thresholds where the ordinary rules dissolved. What unites these sacred landscapes is how they collapse distance between worlds. A Tibetan monastery perched on a cliffside, a Celtic stone circle aligned with solstice sunrises, a Japanese shrine nestled in ancient forest, all served as axis mundi, the cosmic axis where heaven, earth, and underworld intersected. Pilgrims didn't visit these places to sightsee. They came to participate, whether leaving offerings at a mountain's base or tracing ceremonial labyrinths into cave floors. Yet there's a quiet tragedy in how modern maps flatten these spaces into coordinates. We measure Uluru's height in meters, not myths. We drone film Everest summit without leaving Kottars for its spirit. The old wisdom whispers that land isn't inert, it listens. And if we've lost the language to hear it, perhaps their stones and shrines still hold the translation. Now consider how these sacred geographies shape time itself. Not in minutes and hours, but in the slow turn of seasons, the dance of stars, and the precise moments when heaven and earth align. The rhythm of the cosmos pulsed through these civilizations like a heartbeat, not in minutes and seconds, but in the slow dance of constellations and the reliable return of seasons. For the Maya, time wasn't a straight line marching forward. It coiled like a serpent with the long count calendar stretching across 5,000 years, each cycle ending and beginning anew with cosmic significance. When their astronomers noted Venus appearing as the morning star, it wasn't just an astronomical event, it signaled the return of the warrior god Kukulkan, a moment so potent that the pyramid at Chichen Itza was designed to cast a serpent-shaped shadow down its steps precisely at the equinox. This was time as living theater, where the universe itself performed for those who knew how to watch. Meanwhile, in China, imperial astronomers tracked the moon's phases with equal devotion, their lunar calendar dictating when to plant rice, when to marry, even when to wage war. A single misaligned month could mean failed harvests, so emperors kept entire bureaus of scholars whose sole task was to harmonize human time with celestial time. Their calculations weren't just scientific, they were sacred, ensuring that human lives moved in sync with the Tao, the underlying rhythm of all things. Even Stonehenge's towering stones whisper of this temporal choreography. The heel stone doesn't just mark the summer solstice sunrise, it frames it like a divine spotlight, turning a single day into a cosmic event. And in Egypt, the temple of Abu Simbel was engineered so that twice a year the rising sun would penetrate its deepest chamber, illuminating statues of gods who otherwise sat in eternal shadow. These weren't coincidences, they were carefully orchestrated moments when time and space converged, allowing mortals to witness the machinery of the universe. What's striking isn't just their precision, but their patience. Unlike our digital clocks counting meaningless seconds, their calendars required generations of observation passed down like heirlooms. The builders of Newgrange in Ireland carved a narrow passage so that for just 17 minutes each winter solstice, sunlight would flood the inner chamber, a feat requiring centuries of trial and error. This was timekeeping as an act of faith, a promise that if humans listened closely enough, the cosmos would reveal its patterns. Today, we wear watches synced to atomic clocks, yet we've lost something profound, the sense that time has texture, meaning, even personality. For these cultures, an eclipse wasn't just a celestial event. It was a moment when the sun god might be angered or the moon swallowed by a jaguar. Their clocks were alive, their calendars conversations with the divine. And as we'll see next, these rhythms didn't just shape their days. They were etched into the very stones of their cities, where architecture became a hymn to eternal cycles. The stones of these ancient builders didn't just rise toward the sky, they sang to it. Look closely at the pyramids of Giza, and you'll notice their precise alignment with Orion's belt wasn't accidental. To the Egyptians, this constellation represented Osiris, god of rebirth, and by mirroring its stars on Earth, they turned a pharaoh's tomb into a gateway for the soul's cosmic journey. Half a world away, the Maya did something eerily similar. Their pyramid at El Castillo casts a serpent's shadow slithering down the steps during equinoxes, as if the building itself were alive, breathing with the seasons. Gothic architects took this conversation even further. Chartres Cathedral's labyrinthine floor wasn't just decorative, it was a pilgrimage in miniature, designed so worshippers could walk the path of the soul's ascent while the stained glass windows above transformed sunlight into divine radiance. And in Cambodia, Angkor Wat's vast moats weren't mere defenses. They mirrored the Hindu cosmos with concentric rings of water symbolizing the primordial ocean of creation. But perhaps the most striking examples come from places where nature herself dictated the blueprint. The Great Zimbabwe's curved dristone walls didn't fight the landscape, they embraced it, their undulating forms mirroring the surrounding hills like an architectural echo. The Anasazi cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde weren't built on the land but within it, their rooms carved into alcoves as if the earth had offered shelter. Even India's stepwells, descending deep into the ground, turned water scarcity into reverence, each level a prayer for the monsoon's return. What unites these structures is a radical humility. These weren't monuments to human dominance, but to collaboration between builders and breezes, masons and moonlight. Modern architects are only now rediscovering this wisdom, designing with passive cooling inspired by termite mounds or flood-resistant foundations modeled after stilt houses. The lesson, true innovation isn't about conquering nature, it's about listening. And who better to translate nature's whispers than those who stood between worlds, the priests and shamans who decoded storms and stars into sacred guidance. Their stories reveal how civilizations didn't just observe the forces of nature, they negotiated with them. The path between humanity and the untamed forces of nature wasn't walked alone, it was guided by those who could speak both languages. Picture a druid in Gaul, fingertips brushing the gnarled bark of an ancient oak, listening for whispers carried by the rustling leaves, or a Siberian shaman clad in reindeer hide, drumming a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the tundra as their consciousness rode the wings of an eagle. These weren't mere mystics, they were scholars of the unseen, their laboratories the whispering forests and wind-swept plains. At Delphi, the Pythia perched on a tripod above fissures leaking ethylene gas, her visions blurring the line between geology and prophecy. Farmers and kings alike journeyed for days to hear her riddles, believing the very breath of the earth propelled her words. Meanwhile, along the Ganges, Hindu rishis sat motionless for years beneath banyan trees, decoding the universe's secrets not through textbooks, but through the patterns of rippling water and the cries of distant animals. Their knowledge wasn't archived in scrolls alone, it lived in the flight paths of birds, the tension in the air before monsoons, the way firelight bent in sacred caves. What set these figures apart wasn't just their insight, it was their role as translators. When crops failed or plagues struck, they didn't demand blind obedience to the gods, they interpreted. A shaman might diagnose a village's misfortune as disrupted harmony with local spirits, prescribing ceremonies to restore balance. Babylonian Baru priests tracked Jupiter's retrograde motions alongside sheep liver divinations, blending astronomy with intuition. Their authority came from demonstrating that nature wasn't arbitrary, it communicated if one knew how to listen. Yet their greatest lesson might be their humility. Unlike modern experts sequestered in labs, these mediators stood knee-deep in the world they sought to understand. A Maya daykeeper calculating Venus cycles also planted corn with his own hands, feeling the soil's thirst. The Yoruba Babalawo chanting verses to Orunmila could simultaneously identify medicinal plants hidden in the undergrowth. Their wisdom wasn't abstract, it was rooted in the dirt, tested by droughts and eclipses, honed through generations of watching, waiting, and adapting. Today, we've partitioned knowledge into rigid categories: science here, spirituality there. But these figures remind us that the natural world defies such divisions. When a Navajo Hatolea healer sings a mountain into a sand painting to cure illness, or a Maori tohunga reads the ocean's mood before a fishing expedition, they're employing a holistic logic our ancestors would recognize. Not superstition, but a profound acknowledgement. We are part of nature's conversation, not its conductors. And how did ordinary people sustain this dialogue daily? Through rituals that turned routine acts into sacred exchanges. Every planted seed, every kindled fire, every sip of water infused with intention. Every sunrise brought more than light, it carried an invitation to conversation. From the moment an Egyptian priest raised his hands to greet Ra's golden disk, to the Andean grandmother tossing a handful of quinoa to the morning wind as thanks, daily life pulsed with rituals that blurred the line between chore and ceremony. The rhythm wasn't dictated by clocks, but by the elements themselves, kneading bread as monsoon clouds gathered, singing to crops at dusk, leaving a spoonful of stew at the hearth for the household spirits. Consider the Japanese tea master selecting a ceramic bowl specifically to complement autumn's fiery maples, each measured pour acknowledging water's sacred journey from mountain spring to kettle. Or the Celtic farm wife who whispered blessings as she churned butter, knowing the act itself could sour the cream if done with discord in her heart. These weren't empty gestures, they were threads in a vast tapestry of reciprocity, where every action reinforced humanity's bond with the living world. Even children participated in this dialogue. A Lakota boy's first hunt included prayers to the buffalo's spirit, just as a Viking girl might offer her lost milk tooth to the family hearth, ensuring the home's protective spirit stayed strong. Meals became living archives of tradition. The first ripe fig always left for the gods in Crete. The communal pot stirred sunwise in West Africa to mirror celestial motions. What's startling is how seamlessly sacred awareness permeated the ordinary. A Roman farmer pruning vines did so under the watchful eye of Pomona, goddess of orchards, while a Balinese fisherman mending nets paused to place frangipani blossoms on his boat's prow, not as bribery to the sea, but as acknowledgement of shared existence. Their eco-consciousness wasn't preached, it was lived, baked into daily rhythms with a sophistication that makes our reusable coffee cups feel like feeble imitations. Yet nowhere was this dialogue more vital than in matters of life and death. When illness struck, these cultures didn't see malfunctioning biology. They heard nature's voice speaking through fever, rash, or pain, revealing imbalances deeper than symptoms alone. A fever wasn't just an illness, it was a message written in the body's own language. In the rainforests of the Amazon, a shaman might press their ear to a patient's chest, listening not just for labored breathing but for clues about which forest spirit had been offended. Their cures came wrapped in ceremony. Bitter cinchona bark harvested only under a waxing moon to combat malaria, or ayahuasca vines boiled with leaves containing DMT, a recipe said to have been whispered by the plants themselves. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, an Ayurvedic healer in ancient India diagnosed imbalances in doshas, not just bodily fluids, but cosmic energies flowing through flesh and forest alike. To treat a burning stomach, they didn't simply prescribe ginger, they restored harmony between the patient and the fire element simmering within all creation. The Greeks took this conversation to sacred springs where steam rose like the breath of gods. At Epidaurus, the sick slept in tunnels beneath the temple of Asclepius, dreaming of serpent-wrapped staffs while mineral-rich waters seeped through the stones. Their treatments blended practical botany with profound metaphor. Poppy tears eased pain because they mirrored the god's own nectar, while mint leaves cooled fevers just as their crisp scent cooled the summer air. Even Hippocrates, often called the father of Western medicine, insisted illness sprang from environmental imbalances. His famous dictum, "Let food be thy medicine," wasn't just nutrition advice, but an acknowledgement that humans are strands in nature's web. What's astonishing is how universally this wisdom appeared. Indigenous North American healers tracked lunar cycles when gathering echinacea roots, believing potency peaked when the moon pulled hardest on earthly fluids. A notion modern science now confirms affects sap flow. Chinese herbalists classified ginseng as yang energy incarnate, its forked roots resembling the human form, making it ideal for restoring vitality. These parallels suggest something deeper than coincidence, an intuitive understanding that healing required realigning the body with the world's hidden rhythms. Yet their greatest insight wasn't just which plants cured diseases, it was how to approach them. The Cherokee sang to sourwood trees before stripping their bark, apologizing for the wound. Maori healers in New Zealand buried umbilical cords under medicinal kawakawa shrubs, entwining human life cycles with botanical ones. This wasn't superstition, it was ecology in its purest form, the recognition that health depends on reciprocity. Now a darker truth emerges from their texts and oral traditions. These cultures didn't just see nature as a pharmacy, they recorded what happened when its balance was disrupted. The warnings they left about overharvesting, deforestation, and disrespect echo eerily in our age of climate crises and pandemics. Their most chilling prophecies weren't about the end of days, but the end of harmony, and the plagues that follow when humanity forgets its place in nature's delicate web. Beneath the silent moe of Easter Island lies an unspoken warning, one carved not in stone but in the island's own skeletal remains. When the Rapa Nui felled their last palm tree to transport statues, they didn't just lose timber, they severed a lifeline. Topsoil blew away without roots to anchor it, freshwater sources dried up, and clans turned on each other over dwindling resources. Yet their oral tradition preserves a haunting refrain. The gods will go to sleep when the birds fall from the trees. This wasn't poetry, it was prophecy. Long before ecologists coined the term overshoot, these islanders understood the cost of taking more than the land could renew. A similar story unfolded 12,000 kilometers away in Mesopotamia, where the world's first irrigation canals became its first ecological trap. As Babylonian farmers channeled Tigris waters to their fields, they unknowingly drew salt from deep underground to the surface. Over centuries, the soil grew barren, the wheat yield shrank, and eventually, even their goddess Inanna's hymns couldn't summon fertility from poisoned earth. Yet cuneiform tablets reveal that scribes documented the creeping salinity, not as an act of God, but as a consequence of human choices. Their meticulous records, etched in clay, are arguably history's first environmental impact reports. Some civilizations didn't wait for collapse, they adapted. The Anasazi didn't so much abandon Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings as renegotiate with the land. Tree ring data shows a decades-long drought, but their response wasn't mere surrender. They dispersed into smaller communities, shifted crops to drought-resistant varieties, and likely carried ancestral knowledge to the Hopi and other Pueblo peoples. Likewise, the Mayas' collapse was less a disappearance than a strategic retreat from unsustainable cities, with populations resettling around cenotes and trading forest clearances for managed agroforestry. What makes these stories urgent isn't their endings, it's their wisdom. The same techniques modern permaculturists champion, terraced farming like the Inca, rainwater harvesting like Petra's Nabateans, were born from civilizations confronting ecological stress. Even their myths encoded practical lessons. Norse tales of Fimbulwinter warned of multi-year winters after overhunting, while Aboriginal songlines mapped water sources that sustained generations through dry spells. Today, as glaciers retreat and wildfires intensify, we're left with a pivotal question. Will we dismiss these ancient experiences as primitive cautionary tales, or recognize them as the first climate change survival guides? Because the Maya didn't just leave behind abandoned pyramids, they left us a blueprint for resilience written in the language of drought-tolerant crops and seed banks. The choice to listen or repeat their mistakes is ours alone. Now, let's bridge ancestral intuition with contemporary science, how modern climatology confirms what shamans and farmers understood millennia ago. What if ancient myths weren't just stories, but another way of describing the fundamental laws of the universe? Take the Hindu concept of prana, that invisible life force flowing through all things. Modern physics now speaks of quantum fields, an invisible energy matrix vibrating beneath reality's surface. The parallels are uncanny. Both describe an animating pulse connecting everything from galaxies to grass blades. Meanwhile, Aboriginal songlines, those lyrical maps of creation, traced geological features science later confirmed were shaped by Ice Age floods. Coincidence? Or proof that observation, whether wrapped in sacred story or data sets, leads to the same truths? Consider the precision locked in myth. The Maya's Dresden Codex contains Venus tables accurate to 2 hours over a 500-year span, calculations so meticulous they rival modern ephemerides. Then there's West Africa's Dogon people, whose oral traditions detailed Sirius B's existence centuries before telescopes revealed this dense white dwarf star. How some argue forgotten contact with advanced cultures, but another possibility is simpler: sustained, generations-deep observation. When the Navajo speak of constellations as star people with distinct personalities, they're not just spinning tales, they're encoding celestial behavior in narratives anyone could remember. This isn't about romanticizing the past, it's recognizing that myth and science share a common ancestry, humanity's drive to explain the world. Where a physicist sees entropy, the Greeks had chaos. The Hindu god Shiva's dance of destruction mirrors thermodynamics' cosmic dissipation. Different vocabularies, same profound realizations. Even the Norse Yggdrasil, that great tree linking worlds, finds echoes in today's mycorrhizal networks scientists now call forests, wood-wide webs of interconnected roots. The real magic happens when these perspectives converge. Modern ecology is rediscovering what indigenous cultures never forgot, that ecosystems thrive on reciprocity, not dominance. Permaculture designers study Amazonian terra preta soils, enriched by ancestral biochar techniques. Climate modelers consult Polynesian wave navigation charts to understand shifting ocean currents. What ancient traditions lacked in microscopes, they compensated for with millennia of accumulated pattern recognition, a kind of slow science distilled into story. So perhaps the question isn't whether myths were right, but what we've lost by dismissing their lens. In an age of climate crisis, their holistic view, where rivers have agency and storms carry meaning, might hold the antidote to our alienation from nature. After all, we protect what we revere, and that's where these two worldviews could truly merge, not in labs or temples, but in the daily choices that honor the intricate web they both describe. Next, we'll see how this fusion is already shaping movements from regenerative agriculture to rewilding, proving that the oldest wisdom might just be our best roadmap forward. Eco-spirituality, reviving ancient practices for modern sustainability. Deep in the moss-covered forests of Scotland, the Green Man still watches from cathedral walls, his leafy face a medieval reminder that nature isn't just around us but within us. Fast forward to today, and that same reverence is taking root in surprising ways. In Ecuador, the Vilcabamba River now has legal rights, defended in court as a living entity, an idea that would have made perfect sense to the Inca, who saw rivers as ancestors. Meanwhile, Bhutan measures progress not in GDP, but in gross national happiness, where forest health and spiritual well-being weigh as heavily as economic growth. These aren't just policy shifts, they're echoes of a much older truth, that sustainability thrives when it's woven with wonder. Take regenerative agriculture, where farmers from the Andes to the Midwest are reviving practices that would look familiar to their ancient counterparts. Instead of battling the land with chemicals, they're collaborating with it using crop rotations inspired by Mesoamerican milpas, or restoring soil microbes as reverently as the Maori once honored Papatuanuku, their earth mother. Even the architecture of eco-villages mirrors the past, with circular designs echoing Celtic stone rings and rooftops planted like the hanging gardens of Babylon. The lesson: when we treat the earth as kin rather than commodity, solutions emerge that science is only now beginning to quantify. Yet the most radical idea might be the simplest: piety as ecology. Modern environmentalism often leans on guilt, reduce, repent, recycle. But what if we replaced fear with relationship? Indigenous botanists like Robin Wall Kimmerer describe sweetgrass not as a resource, but as a teacher whose harvesting requires gratitude. Japanese forest therapy draws on Shinto beliefs that trees house kami spirits, making a walk in the woods less about exercise and more about communion. These aren't romantic notions, they're proven frameworks. Studies show that forest bathing lowers cortisol levels, while farmers who speak to their crops as the Hopi always have report higher yield. Science is catching up to what ancients knew. Reciprocity isn't poetic, it's practical. Now, scholars are stitching these threads into a new tapestry. Environmental lawyers cite the rights of nature movement's roots in Inca earth jurisprudence. Climate activists borrow from Hindu Vastu Shastra, designing cities to work with wind and water flows rather than against them. Even corporations are listening. Patagonia's founder calls his business an experiment in doing business as if nature mattered, a secular echo of Buddhist economics. The through line: sustainability divorced from spirit is fragile, but when ecology and reverence entwine, resilience blossoms. Perhaps the green man's greatest secret wasn't his connection to the forest, but his reminder that we've always known how to live in balance, we just need to remember. And as urban gardens sprout atop skyscrapers and young activists relieve seed-saving ceremonies, that memory is stirring. Not as a return to the past, but as a bridge to a future where progress means partnership with the earth and with the wisdom of those who never forgot. Next, we'll step into the labs and courtrooms where this revival is unfolding, as modern science validates what sacred traditions always held true. For decades, the academic world dismissed indigenous ecological knowledge as folklore until researchers like Dr. Jane Goodall began decoding the profound intelligence woven into these traditions. Her groundbreaking work with chimpanzees revealed societies with complex kinship bonds, medicinal plant use, and even ritual behaviors, echoing the totemic relationships many cultures forged with animals. It turns out the line between primitive belief and sophisticated ecological understanding was far thinner than we assumed. Dr. Wade Davis, an anthropologist and former National Geographic explorer in residence, took this revelation further. Trekking from the Amazon to the Arctic, he documented how indigenous cosmologies don't just coexist with biodiversity, they actively sustain it. The Kayapo people of Brazil, for instance, cultivate over 200 plant species in orchards they've tended for millennia. They're myths about forest spirits, practical conservation strategies disguised as storytelling, ensuring that no one overharvests the sacred pequi trees. Meanwhile, archaeologists like Dr. Brian Fagan have peeled back layers of sediment to uncover an even starker truth. Ancient civilizations thrived or collapsed based on their willingness to listen to the land. His studies of the ancestral Puebloans reveal how they adapted to droughts by diversifying crops and building intricate water capture systems, techniques now being revived in the American Southwest as climate change tightens its grip. These weren't isolated survival tactics. They were manifestations of a worldview that saw humans as partners, not conquerors of nature's rhythms. The implications are urgent. When a language like Tsuotina, with its precise terms for boreal forest ecology, goes silent, we don't just lose words, we lose millennia of finely tuned environmental observation. Scholars now call this ecological amnesia, the dangerous forgetting of survival wisdom encoded in cultural practices. So let's imagine, what if a modern metropolis like Tokyo or Los Angeles embraced an ancient ethos? Picture rooftops not as barren concrete, but as Chinampas, the Aztecs' floating gardens that fed Tenochtitlan. Storm drains redesigned like the Qanats of Persia, filtering and redistributing rainwater through underground channels. City planners consulting lunar cycles for infrastructure projects, as the builders of Angkor Wat aligned reservoirs with celestial patterns. This isn't about replicating the past, it's about rediscovering the ingenuity within it. These academics aren't merely archivists of bygone eras. They're translators of a forgotten language, one that might just hold the grammar for a livable future. And as we'll see next, some communities aren't waiting for textbooks to catch up. They're reviving these principles with astonishing results. Picture New York's skyline not as steel and glass, but as a living testament to celestial order. The Chrysler Building's spire catching the first solstice sunrise like an Aztec temple, the grid of streets mirroring the Milky Way's sprawl. Taxi horns blend with imagined chants as the Hudson, renamed Mahakantuk after its Lenape origins, surges with the same sacred force the ancients saw in the Nile or Ganges. Even Central Park's oaks take on new meaning, not just greenery but elders in a concrete jungle, their roots threading through layers of forgotten streams and indigenous footpaths. Now shift underground. The rumbling subway isn't just transit, it's a shaman's journey through the underworld, fluorescent lights flickering like torchlit cave paintings. Bodhga offerings of fruit and candles unintentionally echo Maya market stalls piled with sacrifices for the rain gods. And when a sudden summer storm floods the streets, it's easy to envision Mithraic initiates performing water rituals in the financial district's canyons. What this thought experiment reveals isn't fantasy, but a buried truth. Our cities still operate on ancient blueprints. Skyscrapers chase the same verticality as ziggurats, symbolizing power and proximity to the divine. Rooftop gardens and sidewalk shrines to lost loved ones suggest an instinctive need to carve sacred space from concrete. Even Times Square's neon glow could be read as modern votive fire's endless brightness warding off existential darkness. Yet some might argue this is romanticizing. Primitive superstition, they'd say, no different than seeing faces in clouds. But consider this, when a Brooklyn brownstone installs a rainwater harvesting system, it's applying the same logic as Petra's Nabateans channeling desert downpours into cisterns. When urban foragers harvest mugwort from vacant lots, they're continuing a dialogue with the land as old as foraging itself. The tools have changed, not the yearning. This isn't about abandoning modernity, it's about recognizing that the sacred never left. It simply adapted. A solar panel farm is a sun temple for the Anthropocene. Community compost piles revive the cyclical wisdom of ancestor-worshipping cultures. By seeing our world through both ancient and contemporary eyes, we spot the bridges between them. And as we'll soon discover, even the most skeptical scientists are finding evidence that these primitive views might hold solutions to our most urgent crises. The moment European explorers labeled indigenous star charts as primitive, they overlooked navigation systems that had guided sailors across thousands of ocean miles without a single compass. Consider the Polynesian wayfinders who could detect distant islands by interpreting cloud formations, swell patterns, and the flight paths of seabirds. In 1976, when the Hokulea voyaging canoe completed its 500-mile journey from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional methods, modern science had to confront an uncomfortable truth. These so-called myths were masterclasses in environmental literacy. Archaeoastronomy reveals even deeper layers of precision. The Andean Quipucamayok keepers of knotted cord records tracked solstices and planting cycles with a margin of error smaller than Renaissance-era European calendars. Their superstitions about Pleiades' brightness predicting rainfall have been validated by modern climatology. When the star cluster appears dimmer through high-altitude haze, it signals El Niño conditions and delayed rains. Far from guesswork, these were data-driven systems refined over generations. Yet the most compelling proof lies in what these cultures sustained. While Mesopotamia's over-irrigated fields turned to salt pans, the Mayas petcott agroforestry, mimicking natural ecosystems with cultivated plots ringed by wild trees, kept soils fertile for centuries. The same principle now guides regenerative farms from Costa Rica to Kenya, where intercropping techniques borrowed from antiquity boost yields without chemicals. This isn't about nostalgia for the past, it's about recognizing rigor where we least expected it. When a Tlingit elder describes salmon as relatives who demand respectful harvesting, they're articulating a conservation ethic that aligns with today's sustainable fishery science. The irony, modern ecology often rediscovers what oral traditions never forgot, like the Aboriginal practice of fire stick farming. Once dismissed as reckless burning, now hailed as a model for preventing catastrophic wildfires. Artists are weaving these threads into contemporary tapestries. Maori sculptor George Nuku crafts plexiglass waka canoes embedded with ancestral navigation codes, while Inuit throat singer Tanya Tagak improvises melodies that mirror seismic shifts in permafrost. Their work bridges eras, proving that ancient ecological wisdom isn't locked in museums, it's evolving, urgent, and waiting to be heard. The real challenge isn't validating these systems through Western science, but humbling ourselves enough to learn from them. Because when a 21st century climatologist and a Quechua potato farmer compare notes on weather signs, they're not speaking different languages, just different dialects of survival. The thunder cracking across the silver screen isn't just special effects, it's the echo of a 1,000-year-old storm. When Marvel reimagined Thor, they didn't just resurrect a comic book hero, they tapped into something far older. Norse farmers once left offerings in rock cavities to appease the thunder god, just as theatergoers now cheer for a hammer-wielding Chris Hemsworth. This isn't coincidence, it's proof that ancient archetypes still electrify modern myth-making. Video games have become unexpected vessels for this revival. In Horizon Zero Dawn, tribal reverence for robotic creatures mirrors the Ainu people's belief that bears carried divine messages. The game's post-apocalyptic hunters don't see technology as separate from nature, but as part of its sacred web, an idea that would feel familiar to Japan's Shinto practitioners, who honor spirits in waterfalls and microchips alike. Even the protagonist Aloy's name harkens back to the Greek Alola, the personification of war, cries layers of ancestral memory embedded in pixels. Beyond screens, musicians are channeling these forces into sound. Björk's Biophilia album turns ecosystems into orchestras, with songs structured like fungal networks or tectonic shifts. Her performances, swathed in masks resembling mycelium or silicon crystals, feel less like concerts and more like summoning rituals for the Anthropocene. Meanwhile, land artist Andy Goldsworthy arranges icicles into spirals that vanish by afternoon, his transient sculptures echoing Tibetan sand mandalas, both celebrating impermanence as sacred. What's striking isn't just their creativity, but their accuracy. These artists aren't dabbling in fantasy, they're reassembling fragmented wisdom. The Mayan-inspired architecture in Black Panther's Wakanda uses fractal patterns proven to cool buildings passively, just as ancient Copan did. The eco-feminist themes of Princess Mononoke mirror actual Ainu legends about forest goddesses. Even blockbusters are quietly reintroducing audiences to concepts our ancestors understood intimately, that technology and nature aren't enemies but dance partners in a much older rhythm. This cultural shift goes deeper than entertainment. It's a rewiring of collective imagination. When millions flock to these stories, they're not escaping reality. They're rehearsing for it, learning, as the old myths taught, that survival depends on seeing the world alive again. Now, let's step beyond observation into participation, how you can cultivate this connection in daily life, turning inspiration into lived experience. Reawakening ancient connections. There's a quiet revolution happening in a Hampshire field, where archaeologists and volunteers at Butser Ancient Farm are rebuilding Iron Age roundhouses using only the tools and techniques of 2,000 years ago. As they press flint blades into oak beams and thatch roofs with reeds, something remarkable occurs. The past ceases to be a museum exhibit and becomes a living conversation. Hands blackened with charcoal from an open hearth, they're not just replicating history, they're rediscovering a rhythm of life where every task, from grinding grain to shaping clay, was infused with reverence for the materials themselves. For those who can't travel to experimental archaeology sites, the cosmos offers its own immersive classroom. Try stepping outside during a full moon with nothing but a notebook and your own observations. Track how your energy ebbs and flows with the lunar cycle, an exercise Maya timekeepers would recognize instantly. Cities might drown out the night sky's clarity, but even urban dwellers can spot Venus glittering above streetlights or notice how their sleep deepens during new moon darkness. This isn't astrology, it's primal chronobiology, realigning our modern disconnect with celestial patterns our ancestors knew intimately. Sound, too, can be a bridge. At a shamanic drumming workshop in Oslo or online, the pulse of a reindeer-hide drum doesn't just produce rhythm, it mimics the human heartbeat, the cadence of galloping herds, even the seismic thrum of glaciers calving. Participants often describe a shift in perception, as if the drum's vibrations dissolve the illusion of separation between self and surroundings. Similar transformations happen under ancient redwoods or baobabs, where forest therapy guides from Japan to South Africa invite visitors to press their palms to bark and listen for the tree's slow, sap-filled pulse. These experiences don't require faith in spirits, just openness to the possibility that intelligence isn't exclusive to humans. Yet the most accessible portal might be the simplest, cooking as ceremony. When you bake sourdough, you're partnering with wild yeast, a symbiotic relationship the Sumerians honored in their hymns to Ninkosi, goddess of beer. Plant a Three Sisters garden: corn, beans, and squash, and you're replicating the Haudenosaunee agricultural system where each crop sustains the others, a lesson in reciprocity modern permaculturists still study. Even brewing tea mindfully, observing how steam curls like incense, can become a miniature ritual connecting you to Taoist tea masters or Turkish dervishes. What unites these practices isn't nostalgia, it's neuroscience. Studies show that activities like forest bathing lower cortisol, while rhythmic drumming synchronizes brainwaves to theta states, enhancing creativity. The ancient worldview wasn't just poetic, it was pragmatic, recognizing that human well-being depends on engaged participation with the living world. So as you walk away from this screen, pause, feel the weight of your body against the chair, the air moving in your lungs, the light filtering through the window. In that moment, you're not separate from nature, you're an expression of it, just as the builders of Stonehenge or the scribes of Nineveh understood. Their greatest lesson wasn't written in stone or scrolls, but in their daily awareness. That wonder is the first step toward wisdom, and reverence the surest path to resilience. Now, let's gather these threads into a final revelation, one that might just redefine how we navigate the challenges of our time. The thread that binds us all centuries before scientists mapped the carbon cycle or traced mycelium networks beneath forests, ancient voices were already singing this truth: everything breathes together. The Maya greeting in Lak'ech wasn't just poetic, it was a biological fact wrapped in ceremony. When one person bowed and whispered, "You are my other me," they acknowledged what microscopes now show. The same stardust that forged their bones also built the ceiba tree's roots and the jaguar's teeth. Half a world away, Buddhist monks meditating on dependent origination sketched the universe as an infinite web. Tug one silk thread and the whole design trembles. Cut a single strand and the pattern unravels. Fast forward to modern labs, where ecologists measure how the loss of wolves in Yellowstone alters river courses, or how plankton blooms steer global weather. The language differs, but the lesson echoes: isolation is an illusion. Africa's Ubuntu philosophy takes it further. "I am because we are" isn't metaphor, it's survival math. Just as baobabs rely on elephants to crack their seed pods, humans thrive through collaboration, with each other, with the land, with species we've barely named. The Quechua farmers who still pour the first sip of chicha onto the earth aren't performing empty ritual, they're balancing an equation of reciprocity. Take without giving and the system starves, yet history's darkest pages reveal what happens when that balance snaps. Easter Island's last tree wasn't felled by ignorance, but by a society that forgot its threads to the wider web. The ancestral Puebloans who abandoned Mesa Verde during drought didn't lack technology, they lacked time to adapt systems their ancestors had honed over centuries. Their ruins stand as stark reminders. Civilizations don't collapse when nature strikes, but when they strike against nature. Here's the hopeful twist. These cultures also left blueprints for comeback. The Maya's milpa farming, where corn, beans, and squash grow in mutual support, is now a model for regenerative agriculture. Japan's Satoyama woodlands, managed through ancient principles, host more biodiversity than untouched forests. Even the Norse's reverence for glaciers as living beings finds new urgency as climatologists plead for ice core archives before they melt. What if we stopped calling their beliefs mythology and started treating them as humanity's first peer-reviewed journals? Their stories weren't attempts to explain the unknown, they were meticulous records of how to live within it. When a Navajo elder says, "The mountain is a living being," she's not personifying a rock, she's stating observable truth. Mountains breathe through mineral cycles, communicate through mycorrhizal networks, and shape civilizations through watersheds. This isn't about romanticizing the past. It's about recognizing that their wisdom wasn't replaced by modern science, it was confirmed by it. The task now isn't to mimic ancient practices, but to synthesize their insights with today's tools. Imagine city grids designed like Amazonian agroforests, or AI trained on both quantum physics and Aboriginal songlines. The future belongs to those who can weave these threads into a new pattern, one where progress means deepening roots, not severing them. As the screen fades, consider this: the next chapter of human resilience won't be written by conquering nature, but by remembering what these civilizations never forgot. We are the conversation between soil and sky, and the quality of that dialogue determines whether we thrive or vanish. The choice, as always, is ours. The echoes of these ancient voices grow louder as our own world reaches a turning point. What if the ruins we've spent centuries excavating weren't just archaeological sites but mirrors? The Maya watched their cities succumb to drought, yet their descendants still whisper prayers to the rain gods before planting. The Norse faced the brutal winters of the Little Ice Age, yet their sagas wove frost giants into lessons about resilience. These civilizations didn't vanish, they adapted, leaving behind not just warnings but blueprints. A single thread connects their wisdom, the understanding that nature speaks in cycles, not transactions. The Inca didn't build terraces simply to farm mountains. They honored the land's contours like sacred texts, learning to read slopes and soil as fluently as we scan spreadsheets. Polynesian navigators didn't conquer the Pacific. They conversed with it, listening to wave patterns like a language. Their survival wasn't about domination, it was about dialogue. This isn't just history, it's a roadmap. When indigenous Maasai herders rotate grazing lands to let the earth breathe, or Bhutan measures prosperity by forest health rather than GDP, they're applying the same principles etched into Mesopotamian clay tablets and Andean quippers. The irony, modern ecology now confirms what oral traditions always knew, that old growth trees nourish their young through fungal networks, that coral reefs communicate via chemical signals. Science is finally catching up to spirituality. So how do we honor these whispers from the past? Start small. Plant a seed and watch how its tendrils seek light, an echo of the Maya's reverence for corn as more than crop but kin. Walk through a storm without flinching, remembering the Norse who heard Thor's chariot in thunder and respected its power. Or simply pause beneath a full moon, knowing the same silver light guided Bronze Age astronomers and Polynesian wayfinders across continents and centuries. Press like if you'll carry this wisdom forward, not as a relic but as a living compass. Share in the comments which civilization's bond with nature inspires you to see the world differently. The Inca's sacred peaks, the Celtic groves where every oak housed wisdom. Or perhaps the Aboriginal songlines that turn landscapes into stories. As the screen darkens, remember, the ancients left more than ruins. They left a challenge to rebuild not just their monuments but their mindfulness. The wind still carries their voices. The question is, are we ready to listen? Until next time, keep the conversation alive, with the earth, with history, and with each other. End scene with slow fade to black, sounds of rustling leaves and distant drums.